Inheritance is a process of acquiring properties from base class to derived class. From base class to derived class, all properties are transferred here. What do you mean by this visibility mode? When I come on visibility mode, it will control the access specifier of the members of the base class in the derived class. There are totally 5 types of inheritance. The first one, single level inheritance, multi-level inheritance, multiple inheritance, hybrid inheritance, as well as hierarchical inheritance. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. Today, we will start with the revision class on Inheritance chapter. Whereas in the annual exam, from this chapter, you will get only one question, that is in part D for 5 marks. The total weightage of this chapter is 5 marks in the annual exam. Only one question you may expect from this chapter. Whereas when I come on this, here you will study regarding the introduction to inheritance. What do you mean by inheritance? How exactly the inheritance will work, with that the advantages of inheritance, types of inheritance, as well as visibility mode. These are the major expecting questions from this chapter. Whereas when they come on inheritance, it's a process of acquiring the properties from base class to derived class. Then what are the advantages here we have? Then which are the different types of inheritance? Then what do you mean by visibility mode? How to write the visibility mode? Regarding that, you will study on this particular session. Whereas when they come on for 5 marks, what is inheritance? Write the advantages of inheritance. Whereas when they come on inheritance, consider we have a base class. From this one derived class we are creating. Derived class. It means that the base class inherits, especially here, the base class properties are transferred to derived class. For example, father. Father properties are transferred to son. Whereas base class can be called as existing class. Existing class. And child class can be called as derived class, we used to call here. And here the base class can also be called as parent class, existing class, and derived class can also be called as child class. Okay, whereas here what happens, the properties of base class is transferred to derived class, whereas the base class is the existing class and derived class is the child class. Then when they come on inheritance is the capability of one class to inherit properties from another class. This is the main definition of inheritance. When they come on inheritance, it is a process of creating a class using existing class. As a process of creating a new class. Here this can also be called as new class by using existing class. Inheritance is a process of acquiring properties from base class to derived class. From base class to derived class, all properties are transferred here. Then when they come on advantages, reusing existing code. What do you mean by this? Reusing existing code. For example, here the father has some properties. Once if I write the code, this son have the properties of father, then no need to write the same code once again. Only one time we will write the code for father. The same code can be used by derived class. It means that the code can be reused. That is a first advantage. And faster development time. Here, obviously time consumption reduces because once again no need to write the code of father. Only in one line we will write this son have the properties of father. Then obviously time consumption is also reduces, and the father code, once again how many times we want, that many times we can able to reuse, and obviously memory consumption is also very less because no need to write the same code once again. That's why the memory consumption is also less, as well as time consumption is also less. Easy to maintain the code here. Easily we can able to maintain the code here. Easy to extend. Memory utilization is very less here. And easy to extend means, for example, grandfather properties are transferred to father, from father to son. That means easy to extend, easy to maintain, time consumption is less, memory consumption is also less, code can be reused. These are the main advantages of inheritance. Because in the exam, you can expect this question, what is inheritance? Write the advantage of inheritance. Otherwise, you can expect what is inheritance, explain with an example program also you can expect. Now, next question. What is visibility mode? Explain briefly. What do you mean by this visibility mode? When I come on visibility mode, it will control the access specifier of the members of the base class in the derived class. It means that it will tell you whether whatever contents in the base class, the data's function, is it accessible or not. Regarding that, mainly it will indicate. Whereas visibility mode controls the access specifier to be inheritable members of a base class in the derived class. That means basically when they come on visibility mode, there are three types of visibility mode: private, public and protected. Whereas mainly it controls the access specifiers of the members of the base class in the derived class. When they come on visibility mode, the first one is public. Whereas in public, here public members of the base class can become the public members of the derived class. I am going to explain this with one diagram. Consider we have one table, here base class, and here I am going to consider derived class. Here in this I am going to consider this is the base class and this is the derived class. Under derived class we have private, public, and one more is protected. Whereas in this also we have private, public, and one more is protected. See, while writing the table, just think in such a way that in row wise write on the explanation. Whereas if it is private, it cannot be inherited. Compulsory, if the base class members are private, then in the derived class it cannot be inherited. If it is public, whatever heading in the derived class you have, write in the same heading. If it is public, then in the derived class, whichever headings you have, write in the same thing. Here private and here public and one more is protected. Whereas in protected case, just in the case of private, write down private and the remaining write down protected only. Protected. Now, if you observe here, public, here while writing this, write on the public explanation in column wise. See, here public members of the base class become public members of the derived class. Public members of the base class become public members of the derived class. Private members cannot be inherited in the derived class. Private members cannot be inherited in the derived class. And the last one, protected members will stay protected in the derived class. See here we are explaining public. That's why protected members stay protected in the derived class. See, while writing the explanation one by one, you have to write that. While writing the symbol, first class, then derived class name. The child class name you have to write, then colon, visibility mode, then later on base class. This represents the syntax. If I want to create any derived class, then compulsory first class, then derived class name, colon, visibility mode, then later on you have to write the base class. For example, here if I am going to write creating one new class called as son, that's why we will write class son, colon, and the visibility mode will write public. Then father. If I am going to write public, the visibility mode, then father properties will transfer to son here. That means the son can use the data as well as functions which is present in father class also. This is regarding public mode. And here if you write this table, see here, public mode, then here it's first point. If the private members of the base class cannot be inherited in the derived class, public members become public in the derived class, and protected members stay protected in the derived class. Like this you can explain. Next you have private mode. Whereas for private mode, public members of the base class become private members of the derived class. For private, we are explaining public members of the base class become private members of the derived class. That's why the public members of the base class become private members of the derived class. Then private members cannot be inherited to the derived class. Here, private members cannot be inherited in the derived class. If it is private, then in the derived class, it cannot be inherited. Then protected members become private members in the derived class. While writing the syntax, class, then derived class name you have to write, then colon, visibility mode, then later on base class name. If I am going to write private, then the properties of father will not transfer to son here. That means here this visibility mode will control the access specifiers of the members of the base class in the derived class. Here I have written private, then the few properties will never transfer here. And the last mode, that is protected mode. Whereas here the public members of the base class become protected members of the derived class here. And here private members cannot be inherited to the derived class. But when I come on the last one, protected members will stay protected in the derived class. These are the three visibility mode. Whereas here while writing the syntax, class, then derived class name, then colon, visibility mode, then base class. While writing the example, class, son is the derived class, then colon, the visibility mode here we are written protected, then the base class is father. That means the father properties we are transferring to son. Like that we will represent. Whereas the visibility mode will controls the access specifiers of the members of the base class in the derived class. Now is it clear? Whereas once again I am going to recall this. See, when you are explaining private, then first point, private members cannot be inherited in the derived class. Public members become private in the derived class. Protected members become private in the derived class when it is private mode. If it is public mode, then private members cannot be inherited. Public members stay protected in the derived class also. Protected members stay protected in the derived class also. When it is protected mode, then private members cannot be inherited in the derived class. Public members become protected in the derived class. Protected members stay protected in the derived class. These are the three major concepts you will study on this visibility mode, that is private, public and then protected. Now is it clear? Next we'll move on to the next question. Explain types of inheritance. When we come on types of inheritance, there are totally 5 types of inheritance. The first one, single level inheritance, multi-level inheritance, multiple inheritance, hybrid inheritance as well as hierarchical inheritance. These are the 5 types of inheritance we'll get, because so many times they ask this question. Explain different types of inheritance. The first one, single level or single inheritance. Then what do you mean by this? In this, only one base class we have and only one derived class. For example, here we have base and only one derived class. From this, the properties of base will transfer to derived class. For example, father properties will transfer son. This is the base class and this is the derived class. Whereas in single level inheritance, we have only one base class. That is, if a class is derived from single base class, it is called as single inheritance. Now is it clear? The next one, multi-level inheritance. For example, we have base class, from that one derived class, from that one more derived class, from that we have multiple derived class. That means this, if I am going to consider the derived class 1, then it is derived from base class. If I am going to consider derived class 2, this have the properties of base class as well as derived class 1 with that additional properties. For example, grandfather properties are transferred to father. From father, the properties are transferring to son. Multi-level inheritance. Whereas a class can also be derived from the classes that are already derived. We are creating one class which is already derived class. This type of inheritance is called as multi-level inheritance, because you have to write the explanation as well as flow chart, then only you will get the full marks. You have to mention base class, derived class, with that one example also you have to represent here. Next one, we have multiple inheritance. Multiple, the name itself suggesting multiple means more than one base class here. Consider we have base class 1 this is, and this is base class 2. From this we have one more derived class. That means this is derived from two base class, then it can be called it as multiple inheritance. For example, principal, king, queens, princess, from whom it is developed. For example, one more I will take, father, mother. These are the base class. From this base class, I am going to creating only one derived class called it as son. It means that if I am going to consider prince, then king and queen we can consider here. That means here the derived class is developed from more than one base class. If a class derived from more than one base class, then it is called as multiple inheritance. Now is it clear? Next we will move on. The next one, hierarchical inheritance. When we come on hierarchical inheritance, we have only one base class but multiple derived class we have. Consider we have the base class, from that derived class 1, from that another derived class 2, from that another derived class 3. For example, if I am going to consider staff, lectures, office staffs, then group D. That means we have one base class, multiple derived class. If I want, you can write like the another way. For example, father. This father have 3 children, or if you want, you can take 2 also. Son 1, son 2 and daughter 1. It means that only one base class and multiple derived class. If a member of a base class are derived from single base class is called as hierarchical inheritance. Next we will move on to the last one, hybrid inheritance. When we come on hybrid inheritance, it is a combination of hierarchical and multiple inheritance. Multi-level is also there as well as multiple is also there. That's why consider we have base class, from that we have derived class 1 and from that another derived class 2, from that another derived class 3. Now this derived class 4 is derived from the multiple derived class here. Then it can be called as hybrid inheritance. Whereas here staff, lectures, office staffs and group D. From this we have one more derived class, for example student. This is nothing but hybrid inheritance. Then one more question I am to explain, that is few definition you can expect from this chapter, or explain a program regarding inheritance also you can expect. Whereas here define the following terms like virtual base class. Then what do you mean by base class? What do you mean by derived class, abstract class as well as visibility mode? On this type, each definition carries 1 marks because they will combine all the 5 and they are given it as for 5 marks. Whereas here, when I come on virtual base class, when 2 or more objects are derived from single common base class. When 2 or more, here virtual class is mainly a word to multiple copies here. We can prevent multiple copies of the base class being present in an object. Here derived from those objects by declaring the base class as virtual when it is being inherited. For example, here we have one base class. From this we have derived class 1 and from this we have derived class 2. From this we have one more derived class 3. Then what happens? This derived class have multiple copies of the base class when it is comes from base D1 and then D3, base D2 and then D3. That means multiple times we have the properties of base class. To avoid that, we will make the base class as virtual. By that, if I make the base class as virtual, then I can able to avoid the multiple copies of the same data once again here. That is nothing but virtual base class. Next one, base class. What I already told you, base class inherits the properties to derived class. Base class, this is the derived class. It transfers the data, functions, information from base class to derived class. That is, the class whose properties are inherited by another class is called as base class, and it is also called as superclass also. And the next one we have derived class. This is about derived class. The new class can be called as derived class. It inherits the properties from base class. The class that inherits properties from base class is called as derived class, and it is also called as subclass also. We can call it as a subclass also. And the next one is abstract class. Whereas abstract class is used to create the sub-derived class here. Whereas abstract class is one that is not used to create objects. It acts like a base class. From that we can able to create a derived class. But from that we cannot able to create object of a class. It acts just like a base class. But from that we are not able to create any objects of a class. An abstract class is designed only to act as base class here. But here we cannot able to create the object, and here we are not able to work on that. It just acts like a base class. The next one is visibility mode. Already I told you, visibility mode will controls the access specifiers of the members of the base class in the derived class. There are three visibility modes: private, public, and then protected. Whereas here the visibility mode, that is nothing but private, public, protected, in the definition of a derived class specifies whether the features of the base class are private derived or protected derived or protected derived. Mainly it will go to specify that. On today's class you have studied the major question, because from this chapter you can expect only one question for 5 marks. That is, it may be what is inheritance, write the advantage of inheritance, or write a program to represent an inheritance. That you can expect for only single level inheritance. With that, you may expect the questions explain different types of inheritance or explain the visibility mode. These are the major questions from this chapter you can expect. Next class will meet you once again with a new chapter. Thank you for all of you.